There's one team in the NFL that I think is terrifying every other team in the league, and they're scared of what could possibly be this team's future. Now, you probably already guessed the team, and the reason being, 1, the jersey, and 2, the lights. It's the Detroit Lions, and I'll tell you about it right now. So real quick, before I get started into the video, obviously you guys could see that there's a bunch of changes to the setup. We have a jersey hanging up. We have these lights, obviously, and those are the main 2 switches, but this camera quality should be a lot better as well. So where's this video going to start? On January 14th of 2021, the Detroit Lions decided to name Brad Holmes their general manager. He was previously the director of college scouting for the Los Angeles Rams since 2013. And he was key in scouting guys such as Cooper Kupp and Aaron Donald. Of course, Aaron Donald seemed kind of like a no-brainer pick where they were, but a lot of people weren't looking at Aaron Donald like they are obviously now. So, Cooper Kupp was another guy out of Eastern Washington who nobody really knew much about, and he turned out to be arguably the best wide receiver in the NFL for the last 2 seasons. So, Holmes clearly had an eye for talent, and the Detroit Lions clearly had an eye for the guy they wanted. And then on January 20th of 2021, just 6 days after Brad Holmes was hired, he named his head coach, that being Dan Campbell. Shortly thereafter, he had a press conference, and one of the most memorable press conferences.
All right, and so this team's going to be built on, we're going to kick you in the teeth, all right, and when you punch us back, we're going to smile at you, and when you knock us down, we're going to get up, and on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off, all right? And we're going to stand up, and then it's going to take 2 more shots to knock us down, all right? And on the way up, we're going to take your other kneecap, and we're going to get up, and then it's going to take 3 shots to get us down. And when we do, we're going to take another hunk out of you. Before long, we're going to be the last one standing, all right? That's going to be the mentality.
And a lot of opinions were formed very quickly off of that press conference, either radically in one way or radically in another. And Dan Campbell seemed to turn some opinions around. So they got to work immediately to fix this roster and put together something in their vision and to form a team that they believed would be set up for consistent success rather than just having a 1-year miraculous playoff run. So just 10 days after Dan Campbell was named their head coach and 16 days after Brad Holmes was named their general manager, they moved off the face of the franchise, Matthew Stafford. And while many people thought that moving off of Matthew Stafford was a necessary move, and it obviously was for both parties involved, of course, Stafford went on to win a Super Bowl, so the Rams automatically won that trade as well. But I think there's going to be a point where we're going to realize that both sides won this trade. So their first free agency together in 2021. The Lions, of course, had a relatively quiet first off-season. Holmes and Campbell knew there was a lot of work to be done on this roster, and a lot of that work was going to have to be built through the draft. But, of course, they had to attack free agency in a way where they could get guys on smaller market deals, but gain some guys that'll give you some locker room presence. And while they did that, they went out and signed former Green Bay Packers running back Jamal Williams. And if you've seen any, and I mean any, Jamal Williams press conference, you know that he is one of the best locker room personalities in the entire NFL. And if you've watched Hard Knocks, you definitely know what kind of teammate Jamal Williams really is. He gives some of the most passionate speeches in the NFL. He's one of the most passionate teammates in the entire league. And by the way, he's no slouch on the field because the man is currently leading the NFL in touchdowns with 14. And that's pacing all other running backs. That's pacing all the top receivers. Jamal Williams leads the NFL in touchdowns. So, of course, that started the culture building in Detroit. As Jamal Williams is, as I said, now looked at as the heart and soul of the Lions locker room and someone that I feel as though they're going to keep around, even if it's just for the vibes, because Jamal Williams is a one-of-a-kind human being. So now we get into the 2021 NFL Draft. And this is where all the work is going to have to be done by Dan Campbell and by Brad Holmes. Who do you start building your franchise around? Who's your first pick, and what sets the tempo for what you expect to be a successful tenure as a general manager and a head coach. Where do you go? They drafted Penei Sewell with their first pick, 7th overall in the 2021 NFL Draft. And Penei Sewell has turned into one of the best offensive tackles in the entire league. He's turned out to be an absolute stud, and that was just their first pick together. They clearly showed that valuing the trenches is the right thing to do for a football team. But not only their first pick showed that they value the trenches. Their next 2 picks were spent on defensive linemen. Their second-round pick being Levi Onwuzurike, who unfortunately is out for the season. But their other pick being Aleem McNeil, who has actually worked his way into a starting job this season and has become a very good run stuffer and a very good nose tackle at that. And then the craziest part about all this is neither of those 3 were their best picks of the draft. Their best pick of the draft happens to be one of the most underrated players, not just receivers, in the entire NFL. That's Amon-Ra St. Brown, who, by the way, at this current moment of recording, has 82 catches for 898 yards and 6 touchdowns. And that's in just 12 games. And by the way, 2 of those games, he played less than 35% of the snaps, one of which being just 17%. And then 2 other players in this draft turned out to be rotational players for them in Derek Barnes and Ifeatu Melifonwu. Pretty successful first draft to this point. And of course, these guys are only 2 years into their careers to this point, but they have already proven that they can be capable rotation players at bare minimum, and even star-level players at the top. But of course, the 2021 season, as expected, was a tough one. The Detroit Lions did not turn out to be a good football team by any stretch of the measure, and I don't think anyone really expected them to be. They ended the season 3-13-1, and they didn't look all that competitive in the beginning portion of the games, but as the season wore on, they clearly showed strides of improvement as they started to compete in far more games, and Dan Campbell was showing that these guys can really play for him even when there's nothing left to play for on the season. That's the sign of a good coach and a locker room that's bought in. Patience was the key word, and patience was what this front office needed. So we fast forward to the 2022 offseason, and now we get into free agency. So it's another quiet free agency for the Detroit Lions, as of course it's nothing much you could really do in free agency yet, and you don't want to write the checks for guys that are not really going to move the needle for you. And really, free agency is where you start to put the finishing touches on a roster rather than trying to piece it all together. The draft is where you want to start to get your main players, get them on rookie scale contracts, and free agency is kind of like the cherry on top where you finish a championship caliber roster. So, of course, another quiet free agency period for the Detroit Lions, as the biggest signing they made was DJ Chark, a former 1,000-yard receiver, and he signed for a 1-year, $10 million deal, and I think there were some incentives in there. As I said, patience, again, is the key word, as this wasn't the free agency to go crazy, and Brad Holmes knew that. But here we go. Where do they need to build? The draft. So the 2022 NFL Draft. They have the 2nd overall pick, because obviously they were fucking terrible the previous season. So what did they end up doing? They drafted Aiden Hutchinson with the 2nd overall pick, and honestly, Aiden Hutchinson really should have gone first. He was the most polished, pro-ready prospect in arguably the entire draft, and a lot of people thought that he by far had more potential than people were giving him credit for. Of course, the 1st overall pick, Trayvon Walker, had the better athletic profile, but Aiden Hutchinson's athletic profile was no slouch either, as he has a crazy amount of athleticism to go along with the crazy amount of polish. And he's already shown that this season in just his first year. So he only has 7 sacks, and I say only, it's been 13 games. 6 tackles for loss on the season, and according to PFF, and of course, PFF is not gospel, we have to use the eye test as well, he has a 75.6 grade, which is a well above average starter. And by the way, I need to remind you guys that this guy is a rookie, and he already sets a fantastic edge against the run, and that's something that a lot of these younger pass rushers and edge defenders don't really know how to do off the bat. So for Aiden to show that and also show dominance in pass rushing, as he owns a 3-sack performance this season, you could see the flashes, and you could see that Aiden Hutchinson has this it factor to him that he's going to change this Detroit Lions team and change that Detroit Lions defense. So their second pick was slated to be the 32nd overall pick. But they didn't want to sit there. They saw a guy, and they thought that if they could trade up for him, there was every reason to go get him. So they traded up 20 picks from 32 to 12 and didn't really give up all that much. They traded up to get Jameson Williams, who, as I said before, we need to show patience for. Jameson Williams was arguably the top wide receiver coming into this draft before he tore his ACL in the college football championship. Of course, Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave have been absolute studs and are unbelievable football players. But Jameson Williams was looked at by some as the best wide receiver in this class. And if he had the opportunity to run the 40-yard dash, we could be talking about a new 40-yard dash king and someone that could have dethroned John Ross. Of course, we saw some of that speed on display in his second game back as he scored a 41-yard touchdown on just his first catch in the NFL. He hasn't really had that many snaps so far this season, but of course, they're trying to bring him along slowly, coming back from a torn ACL. But in the limited snaps, you could see the explosivity. And you could see that Jameson Williams is going to be a stud, and he fits perfectly right next to Amon-Ra St. Brown, who is their underneath threat. So, of course, those were just the two first-round picks, and those guys are the two guys that you're going to rely upon the most to be main building blocks for your franchise. But some of the other players in this draft class include Kirby Joseph and Malcolm Rodriguez, who have become two guys that seem like they're going to be staples in at least defensive rotations, if not as defensive starters for the future of this Lions team. Not to mention that two other names are James Houston, who over the last 3 games, in his first 3 games in his NFL career, might I add, has 4 sacks already, and also their second-round pick, Josh Paschal out of Kentucky, who has barely played this season. So it seems as though they have a lot of potential on that defense and guys that can, at bare minimum, contribute in a rotation, which is really all you can ask for if you're hitting on a lot of your picks. So just to recap, so far, some of their draft hits in just the first 2 seasons seem to be Penei Sewell, Amon-Ra St. Brown, of course, Jameson Williams, and of course, Aiden Hutchinson. Now, we really don't know about Jameson Williams, but I want to consider him as a hit because I just think that once he gets healthy, his route running and his explosivity will start to show. As long as that guy can stay healthy, I don't see a way in which he fails. And of course, that's not all. They've found some gems hidden, like Malcolm Rodriguez in the 6th round, James Houston in the 7th round, and Aleem McNeil in the 3rd round in previous drafts, and Amon-Ra was a 4th round pick. So they have an eye for talent. They know how to draft guys no matter the round, and they feel as though they can always find a guy that can contribute, whether it's round 1 and pick 1 or round 7 and he's Mr. Irrelevant. So now we get into the 2022 NFL season. And of course, things started looking about as per usual for the Detroit Lions as they could have. They were 1-6 in the first 7 games of the season, and while they looked competitive in most of these games, they were still the Detroit Lions, and nobody really had any shock or any fear in playing them. If you guys remember, I had a podcast earlier prior to the football season, and I said that the Detroit Lions would be a pesky team late in the season. I said they'd miss the playoffs, but I said they'd be a pesky team. Well, since that 1-6 start, which the final loss being a loss to the Miami Dolphins, they then started a 5-1 streak, which commenced against the Green Bay Packers, their division rival. But wildly enough, this 5-1 streak coincided right around the same time that TJ Hawkinson, their star tight end, was traded to a division rival, Minnesota Vikings. The second time that they made a trade with a division rival, the second time it was the Vikings. The first one being the Jameson Williams trade, as I previously mentioned. So for a division rival to make one trade is one thing, but for a division rival to make 2 trades in 1 calendar year is something that we rarely, if ever, see. It seems as though you didn't really need him anymore, and you didn't really need to pay him. And in a way, you got a 2nd-round pick out of it. So with the way they draft, that 2nd-round pick could turn out to be a pretty damn good player. So, of course, I said 5-1 in their last 6. What's the one loss? The one loss was a loss to the Super Bowl contending Buffalo Bills on Thanksgiving Day by just 3 points, and they took them down to the wire. So to see the Detroit Lions push the Buffalo Bills on Thanksgiving, where everyone's watching, to the wire, that's clearly a growth moment right there for a young team that is showing signs of life now. And that's a confidence builder in and of itself. So for them to be 5-1 down this stretch and their one loss, you could look at as a moral victory. Detroit's starting to get a little dangerous. So in those 6 games, Jared Goff, a guy who's been someone that gets heavily criticized throughout the entirety of his career. And I will say one thing. Jared Goff is good and arguably a top 10 quarterback when everything around him is perfect. But that's where Jared Goff fails. He's not a game changer, but he's very good when everything around him is very good. So Jared Goff won't raise the ceiling on your team, but if you have a supporting cast that is a high level, Jared Goff can come close to matching that high level and not making the ship sink. So Jared Goff, over these past 6 games where the Lions have played very good football, has a 10-1 touchdown to interception ratio, and in his last 2 games, he's thrown for 330-plus yards in both. So Jared Goff has been absolutely incredible, and everything that the Lions really could have asked for. He's starting to try to convince them not to draft a quarterback in the future and make Jared Goff that guy. And of course, a lot of people want to call him Jared Goofball because he is Jared Goofball, but goddamn, Jared, keep balling the fuck out because it is fun to see. But it's not only Jared Goff. The defense has stepped up immensely over the last 6 games. As, of course, yes, Aiden Hutchinson is a guy I named previously. Kirby Joseph, a rookie that's been contributing. Malcolm Rodriguez, same thing goes for him. Some of the defensive line is starting to get healthy. Romeo Okwara just came back. And Ali McNeil playing well, playing more snaps. There's one defensive player that I want to highlight more than any other, and that is Jeff Okudah, the former 3rd overall pick out of Ohio State. And Jeff Okudah has had a rough start to his career. And that's been mixed with bad play, but also with some serious injuries, one of which being an Achilles tear. And of course, the toughest part about that is that his first 2 seasons in the NFL got cut short. His second one being cut short the first game that it even started. So Jeff Okudah never really got the opportunity to get these developmental snaps and developmental reps. And everyone looked at him as if he was going to be a lockdown number 1 corner. Well, he's starting to live up to that. And Jeff Okudah has looked unbelievable this season. And early in the season, he was probably their only bright spot right next to Aiden Hutchinson. So to see everything starting to come together for him is a great sight. And I'm super happy to see the guy stay healthy. And I hope that it stays that way for the remainder of this season and the remainder of his career. But he was a big key because he was the only one that was playing good football for the entirety of the season anyways. Over the last 6-game stretch that I just told you about, the defense has held their opponents to just 20.3 points per game, which would currently rank as the 11th best scoring defense in the NFL. Do you want to know what they averaged over the first 7 games of the season? 32.1 points per game. And by the way, that would be the worst in the NFL by about a touchdown. So they were historically bad on the defensive side of the football. And we saw that the offense was pretty good. The offense was pretty damn good. They were playing good football, and they were able to move the ball. And Detroit, if they were going to win, they were going to have to win in a shootout. Well, now Detroit is starting to win, and their defense is starting to help them out quite a bit. So therefore, 3 of their 5 wins in this 6-game stretch has been by double digits. So not only are they beating teams, they're handily beating teams, 2 of which are current playoff teams, those being the New York Giants and the Minnesota Vikings. Now let me dive into the Giants point. I think that the Lions will be the one to take over that spot and make the playoffs. Now, do I know that for sure? Obviously not. But I think that the Lions end up kicking the Giants out of the playoffs. Do I think they run the table? That's a tough ask. I think 9-8 can get you into the playoffs if you're the Lions. But of course, if they go 10-7, I think it's settled. They will make the playoffs. The New York Giants don't belong there. That's coming from me, unfortunately, as a Giant fan. and the Lions smacked us around when they played us. So therefore, I do think the Lions end up making the playoffs, and I think it'd be a very, very fun team to watch come playoff time, because I think it's a team that, if I'm going to be honest, you really don't want to face in the playoffs, because they can beat you in a number of ways on offense. And by the way, have a very elite offensive line where not one of the starters is below average. And honestly, you could argue that none of the starters are even average. They're all above average to elite offensive linemen in the NFL. So definitely a team that I wouldn't want to face if I'm one of those top teams in the NFC in the playoffs. The Lions are getting their groove together, and it's a scary sight because this isn't even the best version of the Lions that we're going to see. So that brings me right into the 2023 offseason. And now things get interesting. So let's just recap what the Lions have going into the 2023 offseason. You have the perfect bridge quarterback in Jared Goff, who's going to play at a very adequate level that can hold it all together and make you a playoff contender next season if he's still the starter. You have weapons all over the field. You have two running backs that are more than capable, one of which just being an explosive play threat every time he touches it, and the other one just being a battering ram that'll score touchdowns if you get within 10 yards of the end zone. You have wide receivers that are elite, two of which in Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jamison Williams, who we think is going to be elite, who complement each other perfectly. As I said, an elite, and yes, I mean an elite, arguably the best in the league type of offensive line. And then, of course, multiple key building blocks on the defense that is starting to show their potential. And that's intriguing because the defensive side of the ball, as I said, was going to be their weakness, or at least it was supposed to be for much of the season, and now it isn't. So therefore, you go into the offseason, and now you could fill some holes with what is the 2023 free agency class, where you walk in with, at bare minimum, $30 million in cap space, and you can make some cuts to get that up over $50 million. The Detroit Lions could walk into free agency with $50+ million to spend and not many holes on their roster. So things could get really interesting for them real quick. So two possible targets that I came up with, and they're two positions that could fill some needs, are, well, Tremaine Edmunds and Jesse Bates. Both are playing on the franchise tag, so therefore, if they don't get tagged again, maybe they aren't so happy with their teams not extending them to long-term deals. So the Lions can swoop right in and give both of these guys some big money deals and fill a spot at linebacker in Tremaine Edmunds, who's been a very good linebacker this season. And of course, Jesse Bates, who's been one of the best safeties in the league this season. So there you go. You fill two spots with two highly capable veteran players who, by the way, are still very young, as Tremaine Edmunds would only be 25 at the start of next season. And Jesse Bates, I believe, would only be 27 at the start of next season. So both of these guys still fit your timeline. And yes, you are paying them, but you have to pay someone. So both of those guys fill the needs that you essentially have on defense. And of course, there's still more, but those two now make your defense far more formidable to go into the next season. So the 2023 NFL Draft is where things start to really get terrifying. And here is where the Lions become a dynasty. Now, the Lions made a trade with the Rams, as I previously mentioned, where Matthew Stafford went and won a Super Bowl. I told you, the Rams didn't only win that trade. The Lions are now going to have a top 5 pick because the Rams are one of the worst teams in the NFL this season. So now the Lions have not only that top 5 pick, but their pick, which will probably land in the range of 16 to 22, maybe a little later. And those are 2 picks that you can use to, if you want, trade up. And of course, if necessary, another first-round pick for next year, because you have the assets and you'll have the team and quality of team to then throw a first-round pick from next year as well into the deal, which there makes it 3 first-round picks to trade, to possibly trade up and get Bryce Young. Now, do I think this is a guarantee? No, but this is my prediction. And I predict that if the Detroit Lions trade up and go get Bryce Young, they will form their dynasty overnight. I really think Bryce Young is that guy. I think he has the it. I don't think there's a weakness in his game. And even if it isn't Bryce Young, you could go get C.J. Stroud as well. Both of those guys would be unbelievable for Detroit, as C.J. Stroud is arguably the best pocket passer in the draft with an elite offensive line in Detroit. That would be a match made in heaven. And, of course, Bryce Young is just a special talent overall, can create off platform. He's very accurate as well. Both of those guys would change life for Detroit. And, of course, you also have the connection with Bryce Young if you draft him, where he used to be throwing to Jamison Williams, a former college teammate. So, therefore, you draft Bryce Young, you pair him up with Jamison Williams, but Bryce sits that first year on the bench as Jared Goff starts the first season in 2023-2024 NFL season. Bryce sits a whole year. Of course, he's capable of playing, but he sits the whole year, learns the playbook to the best of his possible abilities, and then takes over the following season, becomes the Detroit Lions starting quarterback with arguably the best supporting cast and overall roster in the NFL. Because then they open up $20 or $30 million from Jared Goff now being a free agent. And now you can sign even more guys and repeat the process. So you could be talking about the best, most well-rounded roster in the NFL because you have a superstar quarterback on a rookie scale contract and then everything else around him. And that is how you create a dynasty. So, of course, a lot of ifs, a lot of moving parts, but these are just a few things I think are possible for the Detroit Lions. And, of course, there's plenty of other avenues. They could trade for a veteran quarterback if they wanted to as well, or you can even keep Jared Goff because we've seen that if situation is perfect, he can make a Super Bowl. So here's where we get bold. I do believe that the Detroit Lions have a dynasty brewing. I really do, genuinely. And by dynasty, I mean a consistent Super Bowl contending roster for the next decade, if not possibly even more. And that's a crazy statement, but this one will get a little crazier. I think at bare minimum, over the next 10 years, those same Detroit Lions will win at the bare minimum 2 Super Bowls. Is that bold? I would like to think it's bold. They haven't even won one. So therefore, yes, within the next 10 years, my prediction is the Detroit Lions win 2 Super Bowls and are a consistent Super Bowl contender. I just think the NFL is way too deep for me to say that they're going to win 3 or more. But I do believe that within the next 10 years, the Detroit Lions will be able to win 2 Super Bowls, if not even more. So there you go. Thank you guys so much for watching. Obviously, if you noticed, I also have an Innocent Bystander sweatshirt on, and I'm considering putting out a merch line if I continue to gain followers, and if you guys show love, I will start to release some hoodies. Of course, I will sell them and stuff like that, but I need you guys to show me love. And of course, that comes with me being consistent and posting more because it's something I really haven't been doing. And I apologize for that, but I promise you a lot of that stuff was me trying to get everything figured out and wanting everything to be perfect. So I'm going to try my absolute best to get as consistent as possible for you guys to probably put out 2, maybe even 3 videos a week. The podcast will be returning, but stay tuned for that. I'm not giving anything away for that. Of course, the setup, wanted to make the changes. But anyways, if you enjoyed this, please do leave a like, subscribe. Let me know if you have any video ideas for the future. I'd appreciate them. I definitely need some help in getting some creativity here. So if you guys have any ideas or anything you want me to talk about, please do feel free to let me know. Go follow me on all my socials. The link tree's in the description. And, of course, go follow Ball Game on all of our socials. And we're streaming every Fridays from 9:30 to 11:30 live in the morning, unfortunately. We got to wake up early. You guys can too. I appreciate you all for watching again. Take care and peace.